There's a stretch of highway in Kentucky where 23 people vanished in 13 months. The police thought it was coincidence. Families thought it was bad luck. Nobody suspected the charming man at the roadside inn, or the brother who smiled while burying bodies behind the kitchen. Before we dive into this story, I need you to click that like button right now and subscribe to this channel, because the story I'm about to tell you is so disturbing, can't be featured on Netflix. Also, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there, because I want to know how far this nightmare travels. Now, let's continue with the story. The Riverside Inn sat 17 miles outside Harlan County, Kentucky, on a stretch of mountain road that travelers called the loneliest highway in America. Built in 1928, the three-story wooden structure had once been a thriving stop for merchants and families moving west. By 1952, it was barely surviving, a relic from another era that most drivers passed without noticing. Martha Hayes had run the inn for 30 years after her husband died in a logging accident. She'd raised her two sons there, teaching them the hospitality business, how to make guests feel welcome, how to keep the rooms clean and the kitchen warm. But Martha died in February of 1952, and the inn passed to her sons with a mountain of debt she'd hidden from them for years. Daniel Hayes was 28 years old, with the kind of face that made women trust him instantly. He had his father's easy smile and his mother's warm eyes, and he could charm guests into staying an extra night, even when they'd planned to move on. He handled the front desk, greeting travelers with genuine friendliness that seemed to light up the dim lobby. His younger brother Michael was 25, quieter and more intense. He worked the kitchen and maintained the property, spending long hours in silence. Where Daniel was magnetic, Michael was forgettable. Guests rarely remembered him after they left, which was exactly how he preferred it. On a cold evening in March of 1952, Sheriff Tom Crawford sat in his office reviewing missing person reports, 3 in the past 4 months, all last seen traveling Highway 47. All vanished without a trace. The highway ran right past the Riverside Inn. Crawford had known the Hayes family his whole life. Martha had been a pillar of the community, a woman who'd survived hardship with grace. Her sons seemed like decent men, if a bit withdrawn since their mother's passing. Still, something about the pattern bothered him. 3 people don't just disappear from the same stretch of road without reason. He made a note to visit the inn, ask a few casual questions, maybe stay for dinner. Nothing official, just checking on the boys, making sure they were managing without Martha. That same evening, headlights cut through the fog rolling across Highway 47. Sarah Mitchell, 26 years old, drove with her suitcase and jewelry box in the back seat. She was running from a bad marriage in Louisville, heading west to start over in California. She'd been driving for 8 hours and desperately needed rest. The Riverside Inn appeared like a ghost through the mist, its yellow porch light the only warmth for miles. Sarah pulled into the gravel lot, relieved to find shelter. She grabbed her purse and walked toward the entrance, not noticing the curtain moving in the second-floor window. Inside, Daniel looked up from the ledger he'd been studying, the one filled with unpaid bills and final notices. Michael emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. The brothers exchanged a look as the doorbell chimed. Their first guest in 3 weeks had arrived. 6 months earlier, Martha Hayes had died in her sleep, with a secret that would have destroyed her sons. The envelope arrived 3 days after her funeral, addressed to Daniel and Michael from the county bank. Inside was a foreclosure notice. The inn had been mortgaged twice, payments missed for 8 months. They had 60 days to pay $40,000 or lose everything. Daniel stared at the number until the ink blurred. $40,000, Might as well have been $1 million. The inn barely made enough to cover food and utilities. Most nights, they had 0 guests. "We could sell," Michael said quietly from the doorway. "And go where?" Daniel's voice was hollow. "Do what? This is all we know." They sat in silence that night, drinking their father's old whiskey, watching the empty highway through the window. That's when the headlights appeared. The woman who walked through their door was maybe 30, wearing an expensive coat and carrying a leather suitcase that probably cost more than their monthly income. Her fingers glittered with rings. A gold watch caught the lamplight. "I need a room," she said, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd been driving too long. "Just for the night." Daniel turned on the charm automatically, years of practice making it effortless. He gave her their best room, carried her bags upstairs, made sure she had extra blankets. She smiled at him in a way that suggested she was lonely, that maybe she'd welcome company. Michael watched from the kitchen doorway as Daniel lingered at her room, talking, making her laugh. Something twisted in his gut. Not jealousy exactly, but a dark curiosity about what his brother was doing. Around midnight, Daniel knocked on her door with a bottle of wine. She let him in. Michael stood in the hallway and listened. He heard laughter, then silence, then sounds that made his face burn. He went back downstairs and found the woman's purse on the counter where she'd left it. Inside was $800 in cash, credit cards, an address in Cincinnati. She was wealthy. She was alone. Nobody knew she was here. The thought came to him fully formed, like it had been waiting, in his mind, all along. They needed money. She had money. She was already in Daniel's room, distracted, vulnerable. Michael climbed the stairs and knocked. When Daniel opened the door, shirtless and confused, Michael showed him the cash. "We could take it," Michael whispered. "All of it. She's drunk. She won't remember. We could say she never checked in." Daniel's face went pale. "Are you insane? That's robbery. That's survival." Michael's eyes were bright with something Daniel had never seen before. "You think she'll miss it? Look at her jewelry. She's loaded. We're about to lose Mom's inn." The woman called out from the bed, asking if everything was okay. Daniel looked at his brother, then at the money, then back at the woman who trusted him. What happened in that room over the next hour changed everything. When morning came, the woman's car was gone from the lot. So was her suitcase, her jewelry, her cash. The guest register showed no record of anyone checking in the night before. And in the woods behind the inn, the ground was freshly disturbed where Michael had spent 3 hours digging in the dark. Daniel sat on the porch as the sun rose, his hands still shaking, and realized they'd crossed a line they could never uncross. Daniel didn't speak to Michael for 3 days. He couldn't look at his brother without seeing those hands wrapped around the woman's throat, without hearing her desperate gasping. But he also couldn't report it without confessing his own part in the crime. He'd lured her. He'd made her trust him. He was guilty too. The $800 sat on the kitchen table between them, like an accusation. "We had no choice," Michael said finally, breaking the silence. "She would have gone to the police, told them we robbed her. We did rob her." "No." Michael leaned forward, his voice calm and certain. "We survived. There's a difference." 2 weeks later, another car pulled into their lot. A man this time, maybe 40, traveling alone for business. He had a briefcase handcuffed to his wrist and complained constantly about the room's temperature, the mattress, the food. Daniel served him dinner with a smile while Michael watched from the kitchen. When the man finally unlocked the briefcase to retrieve papers, they both saw it. Stacks of cash, easily $5,000. This time, Daniel came to Michael. "I'll get him drunk," Daniel said quietly. "You do what you did before. Quick and clean." Michael smiled for the first time since their mother died. Together. They developed a system over the following months. Daniel would identify targets, travelers with money and no connections, people who wouldn't be missed immediately. He'd charm them, make them comfortable, sometimes seduce them. Then Michael would ensure they never left. But something shifted between the brothers during their fourth victim. A young woman, maybe 22, pretty and naive. Daniel had gotten her drunk on wine, led her to his room, began undressing her. When Michael knocked to signal it was time, he found Daniel frozen, unable to continue. "She's too young," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. "She looks like Mom did in those old photos." Michael stared at his brother, then at the girl passed out on the bed. Without a word, he pushed Daniel aside and finished the job himself. All of it. When it was over, he looked at Daniel with something like contempt. "You're getting weak." "I'm getting human," Daniel shot back. "We stopped being human the first night." Michael wiped his hands on a towel, his movements casual, practiced. "You think you can charm them and keep your hands clean? You think that makes you better than me?" The truth hit Daniel like a fist. He'd been telling himself he was different, that seduction wasn't murder. But he was the bait in the trap. Every smile, every kind word, every moment of false intimacy was part of the killing. They buried the girl behind the inn, the fifth grave in 4 months. Michael started keeping a journal, recording details about each victim. Their names, where they were from, what they'd said before they died. He kept it in a locked box under his bed, like some twisted diary. Daniel found it one night while Michael was out disposing of a car. Reading those pages, seeing his brother's neat handwriting describe their crimes with clinical detail, he finally understood. Michael wasn't just surviving anymore. He was enjoying it. And the worst part? Daniel was starting to enjoy it too. By autumn of 1952, they'd killed 11 people. The inn's mortgage was paid in full. They had money in the bank, new furniture, a generator that actually worked. To anyone watching, the Hayes brothers were finally thriving after their mother's death. Nobody was watching close enough. Michael had started building something in the basement. Daniel heard the hammering late at night, the scraping of wood against concrete. When he finally went down to investigate, he found a room that shouldn't exist. Michael had constructed a hidden chamber behind the old coal storage area, accessible only through a false wall. Inside were chains mounted to the walls, a metal table, tools arranged on hooks. Trophies from their victims lined a shelf, watches, jewelry, photographs, a lock of hair tied with ribbon. "What is this?" Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. "Insurance," Michael said calmly. "If anyone comes looking, the bodies are in the woods, but the evidence is down here, where nobody will ever find it." Daniel noticed something else then, a chair positioned to face the table. Michael had been spending time down here, sitting in that chair, looking at his collection. "You come down here," Daniel said slowly, realization dawning. "You sit here and remember them." Michael didn't deny it. "Don't you? Don't you think about their faces, the moment when they realize what's happening? The power we have over them?" Daniel wanted to say no. He wanted to be horrified, but he'd been having dreams about their victims, waking up aroused and ashamed. The line between disgust and desire was blurring. Their next victim was a couple. Newlyweds driving cross-country, young and beautiful and desperately in love. Daniel said they should let them pass, but Michael insisted they had the most to steal. The husband wore an expensive watch. The wife had diamond earrings. They worked faster now, more efficient. Daniel drugged their dinner wine. Michael separated them, taking the husband to the basement, while Daniel kept the wife upstairs. For the first time, they operated simultaneously, each with their own victim. When it was over, they sat in the kitchen drinking coffee like it was just another night. The couple's car was already stripped and hidden. Their bodies would be buried before dawn. "We should have taken them together," Michael said suddenly. "Both of us with both of them. Imagine the fear, the confusion. The husband watching while we—" "Stop!" Daniel's hands shook around his mug. "Why? You're thinking it too. I can see it in your face." Michael leaned closer. "We've killed 11 people, Daniel. We've crossed every line there is. Why are you still pretending you have boundaries?" Because pretending was all Daniel had left. If he admitted what he was becoming, if he acknowledged the excitement he felt when new headlights appeared in their lot, then he'd have to accept he was a monster. But monsters don't feel guilty. Monsters don't drink themselves unconscious every night trying to forget. Monsters don't cry in the shower while scrubbing blood from under their fingernails. Michael stood and headed toward the basement with the couple's belongings. "Next time," he called back, "we share. I want to see what your seduction looks like when they know they're going to die anyway." Daniel sat alone in the kitchen and realized his brother was right. They'd stopped being human months ago. Now they were just seeing how far into darkness they could descend before it consumed them completely. Her name was Elizabeth Carter, and she looked exactly like Rebecca Sullivan, the girl Daniel had loved in high school. Same auburn hair, same green eyes, same slight gap between her front teeth when she smiled. She was 24 years old and traveling to her sister's wedding in Tennessee. Daniel felt something crack inside his chest when she walked through the door. "I know it's late," she said apologetically, "but my car overheated about 2 miles back. I had to walk here. Do you have a room?" Michael appeared from the kitchen, saw her, then saw Daniel's face. His eyes narrowed with understanding and something darker. Opportunity. Daniel gave her their best room and brought her tea instead of wine. He sat with her in the lobby and just talked, really talked, for the first time in months. She told him about her family, her job as a teacher, how she was nervous about being a bridesmaid because she hated being the center of attention. She asked about him, and he found himself telling her the truth. About his mother dying, about struggling to keep the inn running, about feeling trapped. He didn't mention the 11 bodies in the woods. Around midnight, Michael knocked on Daniel's door. "We need to talk." They stood in the hallway, voices low. "She has money," Michael said. "Nice jewelry, new luggage, and she told me at dinner that nobody's expecting her until tomorrow afternoon. Perfect window." "No." Daniel's voice was firm. "Not her." "Why? Because she's pretty? Because she smiled at you?" Michael's laugh was cruel. "You've killed prettier girls, Daniel. What makes this one special?" "She reminds me of Rebecca. Rebecca married someone else and moved to Florida. This isn't her. This is just another traveler with cash we need." Daniel grabbed his brother's shirt. "I said no. We let this one go. We fix her car in the morning, and she leaves." Michael stared at him for a long moment, then smiled slowly. "You're not in charge here anymore, brother. You stopped being in charge the moment you froze up with victim number 4. He turned and walked toward Elizabeth's room. Daniel followed, panic rising in his throat. "Michael, don't. Please." But Michael was already knocking, using his friendly voice to ask if she needed extra blankets. Elizabeth opened the door, smiling, trusting. Michael pushed inside. Daniel heard her confusion turn to fear. He heard furniture scraping, something breaking. He stood paralyzed in the hallway, just like he'd frozen with victim number 4, unable to move, unable to act. Then he heard her scream. The sound broke something in him. He burst through the door to find Michael with his hands around her throat, Elizabeth clawing at his face, blood streaming from where her nails had torn his cheek. Daniel had a choice: save her and destroy everything they'd built, or help Michael finish what he'd started. He looked at Elizabeth's terrified eyes, so much like Rebecca's, pleading with him to be the good man she thought he was. Then he closed the door behind him and locked it. What happened in that room took 3 hours. When it was over, Daniel walked to the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left inside him. Michael stood in the doorway, breathing hard, blood on his clothes. "Now we're equal," he said. "No more pretending you're better than me." Daniel couldn't argue. He'd made his choice, and Elizabeth Carter would never make it to her sister's wedding. Daniel started drinking before noon. By January of 1953, he could barely make it through a day sober. The whiskey dulled the screaming in his head, the phantom sounds of Elizabeth begging for her life. He'd wake up at 3 in the morning, convinced she was standing at the foot of his bed, her green eyes accusing. Michael thrived. He'd taken over running the inn completely, greeting guests with Daniel's old charm, but none of the guilt. The body count climbed to 23. They'd expanded their territory, sometimes driving to neighboring towns to hunt, bringing victims back to the inn's basement. The hidden room had grown. Michael spent his evenings down there now, surrounded by his trophies, writing in his journal with meticulous detail. He'd started rating his victims on a scale, comparing techniques, documenting what worked best. "You're sick," Daniel told him one night, drunk and reckless. Michael looked up from his journal, unbothered. "I'm honest. You're the sick one, pretending you don't feel it too. The rush when they realize, the power when they beg." Daniel threw his glass at the wall. "I hate every second of it." "Then why do you keep helping?" Michael smiled. "You could leave any time, Daniel. Walk away. Turn us both in. But you won't. Because underneath all that guilt and whiskey, you love it as much as I do." The truth was a knife between his ribs. Daniel did leave sometimes, driving for hours trying to build courage to confess. But he always came back, always helped with the next one, always chose survival over salvation. They made a mistake in February. A family of 3 stopped at the inn, parents and their teenage daughter. Michael said they had luggage full of valuables, that the risk was worth it. Daniel was too drunk to argue. They drugged the parents' dinner, but the daughter didn't eat. She heard her parents collapse and ran, screaming down Highway 47 in the dark. Michael chased her on foot, while Daniel tried to revive the parents enough to move them. Michael caught the girl half a mile down the road. He carried her back over his shoulder, laughing about the exercise. But someone had heard her screaming. Lights came on in a farmhouse across the valley. Sheriff Crawford showed up the next morning, apologetic but firm. "Got a report about screaming last night, coming from this direction." Daniel's heart stopped. Michael appeared from the kitchen, calm as Sunday morning, explaining they'd had a raccoon in the attic making terrible noises. He even offered to show the sheriff, leading him through the inn with easy confidence. Crawford looked around, found nothing suspicious, but his eyes lingered on Daniel's shaking hands. "You doing all right, son? You look rough." "Just tired, Sheriff. Hard keeping this place running." After Crawford left, Michael turned on Daniel with cold fury. "You almost gave us away. You're drinking, you're shaking, you're guilt. You're becoming a liability." "Good," Daniel said. Maybe he'll come back. Maybe he'll figure it out. Michael grabbed him by the throat and slammed him against the wall. If we go down together. You understand? You don't get to play martyr and leave me holding all the blood. Daniel understood. They were bound together now, two halves of the same monster, neither able to exist without the other's complicity. The family's bodies were buried deeper than the others, and Michael started watching the road constantly, waiting for Crawford to return. The couple arrived on a rainy April evening in 1953. Newlyweds, obvious from the way they touched each other constantly, laughing at private jokes. The husband couldn't have been more than 25. His wife, maybe 22. They had Michigan plates and wedding gifts still wrapped in the back seat. Michael saw them first, and his eyes lit up with that familiar hunger. Daniel intercepted him in the kitchen. No, Crawford's been watching us. He drove past 3 times this week. Which is exactly why we need to act normal, Michael countered. Turning away guests looks suspicious. Besides, they're perfect. Newlyweds don't get reported missing for days. Everyone assumes they're too busy consummating to check in. Daniel looked through the doorway at the young couple, so happy, so alive. Something in him rebelled. I can't do this anymore. Yes, you can. You will. Michael's voice dropped to a whisper. Because if you don't, I'll tell Crawford everything. Show him your fingerprints all over this place, your DNA on half the victims. You think I kept those trophies just for fun? I kept evidence, Daniel. Evidence that proves you were there for every single one. It was checkmate, and they both knew it. Daniel greeted the couple with his old charm, gave them the honeymoon suite, even brought complimentary champagne. The husband's name was Robert. The wife was called Annie. They showed him their wedding photos, gushing about their future together. Daniel smiled and congratulated them, while his soul screamed. Michael prepared the drugs at dinner, the same sedatives they'd used 24 times before. But Annie was pregnant, just found out that morning, and refused wine. She only drank water. Only Robert got the full dose. When Robert collapsed face first into his dessert, Annie started screaming. She ran for the door, but Michael was faster, tackling her in the lobby. She fought like a wild cat, clawing and biting, landing a kick that shattered Michael's nose with a sickening crunch. Daniel stood frozen at the dining room entrance, watching his brother struggle with this small woman who refused to die quietly. Blood poured from Michael's face. Annie grabbed a lamp and swung it, connecting with his temple. Michael went down hard. She ran to Daniel, sobbing, begging him to help her. Please, there's something wrong with your brother. Please, help me get my husband to a hospital. Daniel looked at Robert unconscious at the table, looked at Michael groaning on the floor, looked at this pregnant woman who still believed he might save her. He could end it right now. Call Crawford. Confess everything. Let the nightmare finally stop. Michael's eyes opened, focused on Daniel with absolute clarity despite the blood. His hand moved to his pocket where he kept the knife. The message was clear. If Daniel helped her, Michael would make sure they both went down fighting. Annie saw Daniel's face change, saw the decision crystallize. She understood, a moment too late, and ran for the door, but Daniel was already moving to block her path. What happened next took all night. When dawn broke, Robert and Annie's car was gone. Their wedding gifts were scattered in the woods, and Daniel sat on the porch watching the sunrise, knowing Crawford would come soon, knowing he should have let him come months ago. Annie's father was a congressman from Michigan. When his daughter missed her check-in call for 3 days straight, he didn't file a missing persons report. He called in favors. Within 48 hours, Federal investigators were tracing the couple's route south. Sheriff Crawford got the call on a Tuesday morning. A witness at a gas station remembered seeing the Michigan plates turn onto Highway 47, heading toward the Riverside Inn. Crawford's stomach dropped. He'd suspected something was wrong at that inn for months, but suspicion wasn't evidence. Now he had cause to look closer. He arrived at noon with 2 deputies and a warrant to search the premises. Daniel answered the door, his face gray, his hands trembling. Michael appeared behind him, his nose still swollen and bruised, calculating his options. "We need to ask you boys some questions," Crawford said. "A couple went missing last week, last seen heading this direction." "Nobody's checked in here for 2 weeks," Michael lied smoothly. "Business has been slow." Crawford gestured to his deputies. "Then you won't mind if we look around." They found the guest register first, pages torn out where Robert and Annie's names would have been. Found fresh concrete poured in the basement where blood stains had seeped into the floor. Found a receipt for champagne, dated the night the couple vanished. Michael bolted for the back door. One deputy tackled him in the yard, while Crawford and the other moved deeper into the basement. Behind the false wall, they found Michael's trophy room. 23 watches, 16 wedding rings, driver's licenses arranged in rows, photographs of smiling people who'd never been seen again, and Michael's journal, detailing every victim with disturbing precision. Crawford read one page and had to step outside to vomit. By the time he returned, Daniel had collapsed on the kitchen floor, sobbing. "I wanted to stop. God, I wanted to stop so many times." "Then why didn't you?" Crawford's voice was hard. "Because he's my brother. Because I was already guilty. Because I didn't know how to be anything except a monster anymore." Michael was screaming from the yard where deputies held him. "Don't say anything, Daniel! Don't you dare!" Crawford arrested them both. As word spread through the county, locals descended on the inn with shovels and fury. They found the first body before sunset. Then another. Then 5 more in a single shallow grave. By nightfall, the inn was surrounded by press, police, and families holding photographs of missing loved ones, praying their faces wouldn't match the bodies being pulled from the ground. Inside the sheriff's station, Daniel sat across from Crawford and began talking. He confessed to everything, named every victim he could remember, drew maps showing burial sites. He spoke for 6 hours straight, purging himself of secrets that had rotted inside him for over a year. In the next room, Michael sat silent with a lawyer his mother's savings had paid for. He admitted nothing, said nothing, stared at the wall with dead eyes. "I'll testify against him," Daniel said finally. "I'll tell the court everything if you promise me one thing." Crawford leaned forward. "What's that?" "Promise me you'll make sure he never gets out. Promise me he'll die in prison for what we did." Crawford looked at this broken man who'd helped murder 23 people and felt something like pity. "Son, you're both going to die in prison. That's not a promise. That's a guarantee." The trial began in September of 1953 and became a media circus. Reporters packed the courthouse. Families of victims filled the gallery, some holding photos of their dead, others clutching rosaries and weeping openly. The judge had to use his gavel 12 times on the first day alone. Daniel took the stand wearing shackles and a suit his public defender had provided. He looked 20 years older than his 29 years, hollow and broken. When asked to describe the crimes, he didn't hesitate. "We killed 23 people between March of 1952 and April of 1953. I lured them, made them trust me. Then my brother and I murdered them for their money." His voice was flat, mechanical, like reading a grocery list. The prosecutor walked him through each victim, their names, their ages, how they died. Daniel remembered details that made the jury turn pale. A woman's last words, a man's final prayer, the way Annie had begged for her unborn baby's life. Michael sat at the defense table, watching his brother with pure hatred. When his lawyer Cross examined Daniel, trying to paint him as the real mastermind, Michael suddenly stood up. "Your Honor, I need to speak." His lawyer grabbed his arm. "Don't. I'm advising you not to." Michael shook him off. "I'm not letting him make me the villain while he plays the repentant sinner." He turned to face Daniel across the courtroom. "You think confessing makes you better than me? You think your guilt washes the blood off?" "Michael, please," Daniel whispered. "You seduced them, Daniel. You looked them in the eyes and made them feel safe while planning their deaths. At least I was honest about what I am." The judge ordered him to sit down. Michael ignored him. "You want to know the truth?" Michael's voice rose. "My brother loved it. Every second. He'd come down to the basement and stare at the trophies for hours. He kept a lock of Elizabeth's hair under his pillow. Tell them that, Daniel. Tell them how you still dream about her." Daniel lunged across the courtroom. Deputies tackled him before he reached Michael, but the damage was done. The brothers crashed to the floor in a tangle of shackles and fists. 29 years of brotherhood dissolving into pure violence. It took 6 men to separate them. Michael's lawyer was screaming for a mistrial. The judge was pounding his gavel. Daniel was crying and cursing, calling his brother a monster, a devil, everything except what they both really were. Brothers who damned themselves together and would hang together. Michael was dragged to a holding cell, still laughing. "You can't escape me, Daniel. Even in hell, you'll still be my brother." The trial lasted 3 more weeks. The jury deliberated for 40 minutes, guilty on all counts for both men. The judge sentenced them to death without hesitation. As they led Daniel past Michael's cell, his brother pressed against the bars. "It was worth it, though, wasn't it? The power, the control. Tell me you don't miss it." Daniel stopped walking, looked at his brother for a long moment, then spat directly in his face. "I'll see you in hell," Daniel said. "Save me a seat," Michael replied, wiping his face with his sleeve, still smiling that terrible smile. They never spoke again. Michael died first. In 1958, 5 years after his conviction, they strapped him to the electric chair in Kentucky State Penitentiary. His last words were directed at the families watching through the glass. "I'd do it all again." He smiled as they pulled the switch. 2,000 volts ended Michael Hayes at age 30, but not before he'd become the most hated man in Kentucky history. Nobody claimed his body. He was buried in an unmarked grave on prison grounds. Daniel lived 17 more years on death row. His appeal after appeal was denied, but the system moved slowly in those days. He spent his time writing letters to victims' families, begging forgiveness that never came. Most letters were returned unopened or burned. Annie's father visited him once in 1969. The congressman was old now, bent with grief that had never left him. "My daughter would have had a child," he said through the prison glass. "A grandchild I'll never meet. A life you stole before it even began." Daniel wept. "I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't bring her back." The old man stood to leave, then paused. "They're executing you next month. I'll be there to watch. And when you're dead, I'm going to go home and sleep through the night for the first time in 16 years. Daniel's execution came on May 14, 1975. He was 41 years old and looked 60. His final statement lasted 3 minutes. "I don't ask for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I don't ask for mercy because I never showed any. I only ask that the families of our victims know that not a day passed where I didn't see their faces. Not an hour where I didn't hear their voices. I died the night we killed our first victim. What you're executing today is just the shell that kept walking. Annie's father was in the viewing room, along with families of 7 other victims. When Daniel took his last breath at 9:17 that evening, some of them cried. Others sat stone-faced. One woman, whose sister had been victim number 8, fainted and had to be carried out. The Riverside Inn was burned to the ground in 1954 by locals who couldn't stand to see it standing. For years afterward, travelers reported strange sounds along that stretch of Highway 47. Screaming in the distance, lights that flickered in the woods where the inn once stood. Elizabeth Carter's mother visited the site every year until her death in 1992, placing flowers where her daughter had been found. She never forgave, never forgot, never moved past that April night when her daughter failed to arrive at a wedding. Of the 23 confirmed victims, 3 were never identified. They remain Jane and John Does in the Kentucky state records, people who vanished so completely that no one ever reported them missing. Somewhere, they might have had families who spent decades wondering. Or maybe they had no one at all, which is why the Hayes brothers chose them. The case inspired books, documentaries, even a film proposal that Netflix rejected for being too disturbing. The brothers' story became a cautionary tale about isolation, greed, and how quickly humanity can dissolve when morality becomes inconvenient. Sheriff Crawford retired in 1960 and died of a heart attack 2 years later. His deputies said he never forgave himself for not investigating the inn sooner, for not trusting his instincts when they first whispered that something was wrong. In the end, 23 people died because 2 brothers chose survival over conscience, because Daniel's charm made monsters seem human, because Michael's cruelty had no bottom, because once they crossed that first line, every line after became easier to step over. The story should have ended with their executions, but evil doesn't die with the men who commit it. It lingers in the spaces they occupied, in the families they destroyed, in the highway that still carries travelers past the empty lot where nightmares were born. Some roads in America are haunted not by ghosts, but by memory. Highway 47 is one of them. If this story disturbed you, it should. Click that like button and subscribe to this channel, because tomorrow, we're bringing you another case so twisted, the darkness doesn't end here. It never does. We're just getting started.